Kira ko baka motor niya. Sa ang mga sa mga dito.
Told the court that Bernardo decided that December 23rd would be the time for the attack. She said it was Bernardo.
She's testifying against Paul Bernardo, saying she didn't want to get married to him, that he was beating her daily, and she was living a lie. Young women driving around southern Ontario. If he spotted a girl he liked, Homolka said, they'd follow her home and watch her undress.
Statistics will show that in just one lifetime, we will walk past approximately 36 people who are potential murderers. But the odds of you meeting one is 0.00015%. A very low chance, but it's never zero. Serial killers continue to be the hot button topic in psychology. The prime argument is that if people are born that way, or did society morph them into the monster they would become? Of course, it's not as simple as narrowing it down to just one answer. Cinema has either glamorized or put out awareness about serial killers for the past few decades. Netflix's Ted Bundy, Patty Jenkins' Monster, and David Finch's Zodiac. We've grown a fascination with these kinds of people strictly because we can't see ourselves in their shoes. Never in a million years could we ever imagine ourselves doing something completely heinous. You could be the most intelligent, most liked, and all-around great person. But what do your intrusive thoughts tell you? And what did they tell Paul Bernardo? Paul Kenneth Bernardo was born in the suburbs of Scarborough, just a few minutes outside of Toronto, Canada. Paul's childhood wasn't a happy one. His father, Kenneth Bernardo, would frequently SA his older sister, Deborah, often in front of Paul himself and other family members. Eventually, Kenneth would be arrested and charged for sexual abuse. Marilyn Bernardo, Paul's mother, suffered from depression and would take herself away whenever her husband would be doing these inappropriate acts. In later years, when Paul would be asked about his childhood, he would say that he had a very happy one, and that he was most happy when he was in the Boy Scouts. Little did they know what was lurking in his demented mind. When Paul was 16, he had a huge fight with his mother in regards to his father. Marilyn told Paul that he was a product of an affair and that Kenneth wasn't his real father. Feeling absolutely furious, Paul screamed at her, calling her horrible names, and Marilyn screamed back, calling him a bastard from hell. Not long after this, Paul's first girlfriend decided to break up with him and quickly moved on to one of his friends. This brought out an early sign of Paul's mental state, so in retaliation, he gathered all of the girl's belongings and burned it, severing all ties with her. Paul Bernardo attended Sir Wilfrid Laurier High School in his same suburb hometown. In 1982, he graduated and attended the University of Toronto Scarborough campus. A little morbid fun fact, around the same time, another infamous serial killer went to this same university, Russell Williams, who murdered 2 women but claims to have murdered 86. Paul and his college friends would frequently practice pickup techniques so that they could pick up women at bars. Paul was a man with a slick tongue and a devilish charm, so picking up women wasn't a challenge for him. Although later on these encounters would lead to sexual violent behavior, he would threaten these women with murder, stating that he would kill them if they told anyone about the abuse. These threats wouldn't work on 2 of these women, as in 1986, Paul Bernardo would be served with restraining orders. In October of 1987, Paul Bernardo would meet his soon-to-be wife and partner in crime, Karla Homolka. Karla was only visiting Scarborough as originally she's from Mississauga, a city that's just 25 minutes away from Toronto. Paul introduced himself to Karla and they immediately had a spark. Paul, not wanting to beat around the bush, he expressed to Karla that he has strange sexual fantasies that society may not find normal. To his surprise, Carla actually accepted him and encouraged his wild fantasies. Throughout the years 1987 to 1990, Paul's rape spree was out of control and had every woman on high alert. One of Paul's strategies would be waiting at bus stops until women get off. As the women walked away, Paul carefully stalked them until they met a somewhat quiet area. On May 14, 1987, Paul managed to follow a 19-year-old woman and rape her on her own front yard. 2 months later, Paul attempted the same with another woman, but this victim fought back, making him retreat. An official public warning wouldn't be put out by the Toronto police until December of 1987, urging women to refrain from traveling at night. On December 23, 1987, a description of the so-called Scarborough rapist was put out in public papers. 4 years later, and Paul is still at large, with Toronto police having nothing to go on. Through May to September of 1990, Toronto police gathered 130 suspects and gathered each of their DNA for forensic studies, and see if they correspond to DNA that was found at one of the crime scenes. Police managed to get 2 tips that pointed at Paul Bernardo, one from a bank employee and another from Tina Smyrnis. Tina just so happened to be the wife of one of Paul's friends. Tina told police that one day at work, Paul was called in by a group of officers that wanted to question him in regards to a rape investigation that happened in December of 1987. However, Paul actually never ended up making it to that interview. Tina goes on to say that Paul was very open with his sex life, stating he really liked rough sex. Toronto police finally managed to interview Paul on November 20th, 1990. Paul voluntarily provided DNA for forensic testing. Officers asked Paul if he knew why he was being interviewed in regards to the series of rapes. Paul answered, "Because I hold similarities to the man in the wanted poster." Once he was done with police, he was let go and free to walk the streets again. Carla knew very well of Paul's crimes, but she loved him too much to ever turn her back on him. Paul found himself spending a lot of time with the Homolkas. They had no idea that evil was lurking within their house. Well into the year of 1990, Carla and Paul were engaged and were completely inseparable. But Paul got a new obsession. It was Carla's little sister, Tammy. Carla helped Paul gain access into Tammy's bedroom window so that Paul could watch her while she slept. One night, Carla took some Valiant pills that she got from a clinic she worked at and crushed them up into the spaghetti dinner that they fed Tammy. Tammy then lost consciousness for a couple minutes and was taken to her bedroom by Paul, to which he then SA'd her while Carla watched. But just a few minutes went by until Tammy would regain consciousness again and Paul quickly backed off her. Just 6 months before Carla and Paul would get married, Carla took an anesthetic agent called Halothin, which she got from the clinic she worked at. Carla and Paul made a mixed cocktail of rum and eggnog and gave it to 15-year-old Tammy. When Tammy would lose consciousness again, Carla put a soaked cloth of Halothin on top of Tammy's nose and mouth. Still feeding into his sick fantasies, Carla told Paul that assaulting Tammy would be his Christmas present. As the assault wasn't bad enough, they decided to get a video recorder and begin filming it. But Tammy began to vomit and shake uncontrollably. Desperately trying to revive her, they couldn't, so they redressed her, hid the evidence, and put her in her bedroom, until finally calling 911. Tammy Homolka was taken to St. Catherine's General Hospital, but unfortunately after a few hours, she passed away. The official records state that the cause of death was choking on her own vomit due to consumption of alcohol. After the funeral, Carla and Paul moved to Port Dalhousie to give Carla's parents some time to grieve. In the early morning of June 15th, 1991, Paul was driving around Burlington, Ontario, looking to steal license plates, when suddenly he laid eyes on 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey. Paul got out of his car and approached her. When asked about what he wanted, he just stated he was going around town burglarizing houses. Being locked out of her own house by her parents because of missing curfew, She asked Paul if he had any cigarettes. Paul said yes and escorted her to his car. As soon as he opened the door for her, he blindfolded her and stuffed her into the car. Tying her up in the back and leaving her on the floor, he then called Carla and said, "We have another victim." The two tortured and SA'd Leslie and even got it on tape. On the tape, Paul says the following to Leslie: "You're doing a good job, Leslie, a damn good job. The next 2 hours are going to determine what I do to you. Right now, you're scoring perfect." After it was over, Carla gave Leslie a dose of Hellcoin. Paul then strangled her to death and placed her in the basement. Even in death, her suffering still wasn't over, as the two would dismember her body and place each part into buckets of cement. The parts were then disposed of at Lake Gibson, just 11 hours south of Dalhousie. The parts would be found on June 29, 1991, and orthodontic technology would be used in identifying her.
Discovered her body, dismembered and encased in concrete in the shallow waters of Lake Gibson near Thorold.
During after-school hours on April 16, 1992, Bernardo and Carla were driving through St. Catharines looking for more victims. They were driving past Holy Cross Secondary School when they spotted 15-year-old Christine French. She was walking home from school all alone at the time when she was spotted. After pulling in and parking at a parking lot at a nearby church, Carla stepped out of the car with a map, pretending to need assistance. While being distracted by looking at the map with Carla, Paul sneaked up from behind Christine and attacked her, pointing a knife at her, and then taking her to the car and stuffing her inside. After not coming home for some time, French's parents became worried and called the Niagara Regional Police Department. A search team was put together and was made to look for Christine's regular routes. Finding out that a few witnesses saw a young girl getting put inside a car by a man and a woman. Christine's shoe was also found at the parking lot. As you could imagine, Carla and Paul tortured and SA'd Christine and caught it on tape. Sadly, her body was found in a ditch in Burlington, Ontario.
April 16, 1992, the day before Good Friday, police focused their attention on yet another missing teen. 15-year-old Kristen French disappeared while walking home from Holy Cross Secondary School in St. Catharines.
In December of 1992, Paul's DNA was finally tested at a forensic lab, despite his DNA being received 2 years prior. On the 27th of December 1992, Paul severely beat Carla with a flashlight, leaving tremendous bruising on her face. When Carla went back into work on January 4th, 1993, she expressed to her coworkers that she was in an automobile accident. Her coworkers became skeptical and proceeded in calling her parents. Carla was then forcefully removed by her parents from Paul's house, and her parents brought charges against Paul. Carla was taken care of at St. Catharines General Hospital, but then was questioned by Niagara police. Meanwhile, back at the forensic lab, Paul's DNA turned out to be a match with that of the crime scene of the Scarborough rape. Toronto police immediately put Paul under 24-hour surveillance. On February 9, 1993, Carla confessed to her aunt and uncle about Paul being the Scarborough rapist, as well as her knowing about all the crimes he committed. Carla's lawyer tried to get immunity for her, but because she participated in the crimes that were caught on film, immunity was denied. On February 17, 1993, Paul Bernardo was officially arrested for multiple charges, all linked to murder. Police obtained a search warrant for Paul's home in search for the tapes, but all they could find is one tape of Carla SAing an unidentified woman. Paul told his lawyer that the tapes were in the upstairs washroom in the light fixtures. His lawyer went to the house and found the tapes themselves and hid them away from police, only for him to resign as Paul's lawyer. Paul was then given a new lawyer, John Rosen, and he turned the tapes over to the police. Carla was given a plea deal of just 12 years in prison if she confessed to all the crimes. If she would deny the plea, she would be charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of second-degree murder. Carla couldn't see any way out of this, so she agreed to the guilty plea. In February of 1994, Carla officially divorced Paul Bernardo. Paul Bernardo was tried for the murder of Leslie Mahaffey and Christine French. On September 1st, 1995, Paul Bernardo was convicted of 2 first-degree murders and 1 sexual aggravated assault charge, and received a life sentence without the chance of parole for 25 years. He was also labeled a dangerous offender, so his release is highly unlikely. In 2006, Bernardo confessed to 10 more assaults that happened in 1986, but weren't mentioned in court. In 2018, Paul was eligible for parole, but got denied, was eligible again in 2021, but was once again denied. His next parole hearing is February 2024. 30+ years later, Karla Homolka has settled in Quebec, Canada, and has since had 3 children with a new husband. Karla has lived a quiet life since being released from prison. In her last interview, she tells a reporter that she is really not likely to reoffend ever again. Given the fact that it's been 30+ years, perhaps she has turned her life around, but perhaps let's keep one eye on her. Before ending off, I just want to say rest in peace to all the victims who suffered at the hands of Paul Bernardo. Such scum like him should never be able to see the light of day and should be under the prison. If you guys like this documentary and want to see more, please leave a comment down below and like and share with your friends. I'll catch you all in the next one. Have a good one.